Good morning. Thank you, Roberta. We appreciate it. Yeah, so scaling without burnout. Let's dive into it. All right, cool. So the agenda today, just going to briefly do an overview of the different HR support models that we see, different options that are out there, then the problem, HR debt, how HR can affect your organizations, hold back your mission, and then the different solutions that are available out there for HR. Finally, end with some results that we see as trends across the industry, and then end things off with some questions. Cool. So HR options, the five most common, the PEO, Professional Employer Organization. We'll go into more details on what that is pretty soon here in the webinar. ASO, Administrative Services Organization, Payroll HR Platform, Fractional HR Consultant, and In-House HR. All of these can be good solutions depending on the organization size, the needs that they have. But yeah, and then we'll kind of dive in here. Cool. So first, the problem, HR debt. I figure the best way to talk about this is maybe share a couple stories that I've seen with clients that I've worked with in the past. There's an organization that I spoke to in 2023. We quoted them. The numbers on the medical side for PEO didn't look great, so they didn't end up moving forward. Made sense. In 2024, they had to let some people go. Unfortunately, one of those people thought that they were wrongfully terminated, filed a suit against the organization. They didn't really have things buttoned up in terms of how they tracked their performance management. So they had to spend probably over 24 hours between the executive leadership team dealing with their lawyers, auditing their processes. They spent a little over $20,000 on everything to fight this case. When they finally got into court, the claimant, or sorry, the person that was accusing them didn't even show up to either of the court appointments. So all of that time and money was just wasted. Another one that I've seen was a school. They tracked their exempt and their non-exempt employees on two different spreadsheets. Then they had to reconcile these spreadsheets together, send them over to their accountant. And this whole process for payroll alone took about a full working day for their administrator. And it was just kind of an example of a disparate process that takes a lot more time than it should, when they could have been focusing more on their students and also the mission of their school. A third one that I saw, it had to do with the benefits side. They didn't have a good system for communicating with their carrier, for dealing with their benefits. They had contracts that would run out at the end of July. And so what would often happen is they would have to communicate with their carrier about these people who are dropping off the health insurance coverage. And so they wouldn't pay for these people's insurance for August and the following months. And year after year, the carrier would cancel their coverage for a month. They'd finally get in contact with them again. The carrier would apologize, say it wouldn't happen again, and then this has happened year over year over year. So these were just three areas where we saw processes that weren't in place, that HR debt, that just led to continuing problems and time wasted on tasks that could have been automated.
Okay. Well, I'd like to share a little bit of a story with you too that I think illustrates a lot of the trends and the challenges we see oftentimes in the nonprofit community. But I had a previous client who had gone to work for a new nonprofit organization. They had been about 6 months on the job, and I reached out to them, and through our research, learned quite a few things about the new organization. First of all, the employees had a severe dislike for their insurance plans. And just to give you an example, there was actually only one plan, and it literally had a 50% co-insurance for in-network programs. So that was incredible. Also, they didn't have great participation because no one really liked the insurance. Their previous management had been in place for many years, and they didn't really keep up with the industry changes. So I think that led to a lack of morale. There was definitely a morale issue that was commented on. Also, we noticed that benefit deductions had not been done accurately for some of the employees, and that led to having to do quite a few adjustments to future paychecks to get the corrections made. Some additional challenges we saw were compliance concerns. Also, they had a lot of young people that worked for them, and what we discovered was that there were some challenging HR violations that needed to be addressed. Also, disparate systems. So they were spending a lot of their time reconciling between these disparate systems, between each different pay cycle. And then the last thing that was noted was that they were having difficulty attracting the talent that they needed to move the organization forward. So fast forward a year, and let me tell you about some of the changes that we observed in talking to the leadership a year later. They described the changes as transformational. And what they said was you could actually feel it in the hallways. The employees felt heard and they felt valued. In fact, they were able to attract top talent, unlike they had been in previous years. Also, employees now had choices in health plans. The participation in those plans climbed. The HR administration took less time from a leader's perspective. And they had built a trust relationship with their HR partner, which really gave them an extensive an extension of their team from the HR partner standpoint. And then the last note would be that the team was better able to focus on the things that really mattered to the organization instead of spending their time on administrative tasks. And the change that was implemented was to begin using a PEO organization. And for those of you that haven't heard the term PEO before, it stands for Professional Employer Organization. And that is a little bit of a unique relationship. Unlike any other HR partnership, in that there is an element of what we call co-employment. That co-employment allows us to literally share in the risk with our clients. So going forward, if one of our clients was ever faced with some type of legal situation that was brought about by an employee or an employment-related legal issue, the PEO organization, excuse me, was able to get involved right away and to help mitigate that risk on behalf of the client. And specifically in the co-employment relationship, the PEO is actually the employer of record when it comes to tax purposes. So as far as defining the co-employment relationship, Both the client as well as the PEO both have specific roles. The PEO organization is typically the sponsor of the employee benefits program, and they also assist or aid the client in any HR related tasks. The business still remains the employer with the same rights and responsibilities for making all workplace decisions, including hiring, firing, compensation, and more. Excuse me. The PEO is actually able to help with all of those critical HR functions for the business, such as payroll processing, payroll tax filings, access to benefits, and also consulting support, as well as providing a technology platform that helps them to manage the HR process. Typically, PEO organizations offer a wide range of employee benefits, everything from health insurance to dental, vision, short-term and long-term disability, life insurance, as well as all the voluntary benefits. They also offer health advocate services as well as employee assistance programs. PEOs typically take on the responsibility of providing the workers' compensation insurance, as well as an EPLI insurance policy and a 401k plan if the employer should so choose. PEOs also provide HR software so that employees can more easily manage things like payroll taxes, time and attendance, PTO tracking, employee onboarding, benefits enrollment, plus an HR resource library. The one other message that I think is important to get across is what a PEO isn't. And, sometimes people get confused when they hear the term professional employer organization, and they think of us as something like a leasing company or a employee leasing or staffing company, and that is not what we are at all. We do not provide the employees. We simply assist in the co-employment piece. Also, we do not interfere with the decisions of our clients. It is still up to them to make all the decisions to direct the business. And then the last thing that I think is important to remember is that a PEO relationship should never interfere with any tax benefits that you might receive as a nonprofit organization. So really, the PEO relationship is designed to enhance, not to distract away from any of those options.
This one will be a little bit shorter, and the main reason is because PEO and ASO are very similar. As far as the technology side, expense management, applicant tracking, managing the employee life cycle, that's all the same. HR consulting, also typically included in an ASO option. The only difference is that co-employment piece. There's no co-employment with an ASO. So when it comes to becoming the employer from a tax perspective, like you'd have with the PEO, that wouldn't be the case here. So the PEO wouldn't share that liability with you when it comes to employment related risk or potential legal situations. The one other difference is the benefit side and the insurance with an ASO organization. Once again, since there's no filing the taxes under the PEO's EIN, what that means is you don't have access to the master plans for benefits that you would have with a PEO. You don't have access to those economies of scale on things like insurance. ASO options can also be great Maybe your organization doesn't qualify for the medical plans for PEO, but you still need that HR piece. ASO is great. Oftentimes we'll have clients that switch from PEO to ASO when they hit a certain size, just because it makes sense to do so. Or maybe they've reached a point where they need to have like a level funded healthcare plan that you wouldn't be able to get on the PEO master plans. So it really is organization specific, based on your size, your needs, how things look like when you quote with a PEO. But I hope that does a good job of kind of understanding that difference in those two models. All right, I wanted to include this slide because I think it does a good job of showing how an organization goes from being a startup with no HR to being a fully grown large company with a built out HR model that's scaled with the organization. Typically we'll see an executive director, a CFO, a COO, a CEO, founder doing a lot of these HR tasks. They're trying to drive the mission, they're trying to drive revenue, but at the same time, they're doing payroll and they're doing benefits administration and they're answering HR questions, or maybe they're having to get somebody's benefits card to them. And these all take away time from the mission. What we've seen is HR tends to come last for growing organizations, which can create some of those HR debt issues that we've seen. But typically, we'll see them grow into a reactive organization, so they only deal with these HR issues as they pop up. Hopefully, it's not something too major, but these things can shutter a growing organization and close them for business if you do get a certain EEOC or sexual harassment, wrongful termination claim. If you're having issues with your taxes and your compliance, it raises risks for the business. And ultimately, whether it's through a PEO, an ASO option, maybe just bringing in a fractional HR person to tighten up all these processes for you, you ultimately want to reach a point where you have a repeatable process, where you have a system in place that covers all of your bases, that ties everything together, that isn't incredibly cumbersome and is wasting staff time, but rather enabling them. So all the minutia that goes into running a business or a nonprofit, all the things that you didn't sign up for when you first started it, are automated. You can focus on the things that really matter, the company culture, driving revenue, driving the mission. And I think that's what a lot of these options do, and just finding one that works out best for the organization that you have. So just some results that we saw from organizations adopting PEO. These are kind of general research. We do have the links to each of these studies, but we did see that annual administrative costs are around $450 lower per employee for businesses that use a PEO. When it comes to revenue growth from 2015 to 2016, firms that used a PEO had twice the revenue as comparable non-PEO firms. And then we also saw that employee turnover was 10 to 14% lower for PEO clients. And I think a lot of that just has to do with having the right processes in place, making sure that you're buttoned up on compliance, your FMLA, your employee handbook is all good to go. It's up to date. But then also just having those added benefits, being a part of economies of scale to have richer plans and more plan choice for your employees so they can find the right medical situation that works for them and their family. And it also creates a stickier employment situation for them. So yeah, we do see some great results on the PEO side in the way that it can help protect small, medium-sized businesses. And yeah, we're excited to answer any questions. And then this was just an internal study that we did with some of our clients and the experience moving over to PEO, just in terms of productivity, attracting talent, peace of mind. A big thing that we say over here is PEOs are great sleep insurance for business owners on the HR side, covering up covering a lot of these, potential risky areas that could keep them up at night. But so some of the key takeaways that we see here, I know kind of our biggest things were how to prevent burnout and high turnover, staying mission focused while scaling your HR functions, and then of course just competitive benefits and compliance support for employee retention and engagement. I think Cindy told a great story that tied together a lot of these different areas, and how your HR strategy can really affect them. At the end of the day, HR is about your people, and your people are the driving force of your business. So I think that when it is something that is left last or isn't thought about until an organization reaches a certain point, I think that can slow down the growth of that organization and its ability to scale. Hire the right people to take it where you want it to go.
All
Love to
right.
answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Austen and Cindy. That was so helpful. And I just love hearing the stories, just how you guys have been able to help organizations really focus on their mission. That's really good. So if you have any questions, you can drop them in the Q&A section. We have a few more minutes to answer those. And then I will be sending out the slide deck and the recording later. Also, before we get to questions, if anybody is interested in following up with TriNet and seeing if a PEO is good for your organization, getting some specific pricing or anything, Carrie's going to drop Austen's information in the chat, and also I'll include it in the email whenever I send it out. So, all right. Question number one is, how long does it actually take to transition to a PEO?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it, of course, depends on the size of the organization. It depends on the complexity of the organization. Typically, I would say it takes 1 to 3 months, depending on the size. We'll typically start with the mission critical items, your payroll, your benefits, administration, and then we move on to some of the tech within the platform. So if that's applicant tracking, expense management, performance management, if you have certain reports that you need to automate for your board or maybe for donors or foundations that you're getting grants from, those are all things that we can get set up. Time and attendance, that's something that can take a little bit longer if you have a lot of exempt and not exempt employees, if you've got different pay cycles, if you've got different pay rates, just depending on that complexity. But yeah, we typically will handhold, and pretty much most PEOs will handhold you through that whole process, run your first payroll with you, make sure everything's comfortable. We can continue to run payrolls with you after that as well. But we really want to automate it and get you self-sufficient as quick as possible. But we are there to support you. So I hope that answers the question around timeline.
Yeah, thank you. That is really helpful. And I love one of the reasons Solace decided to partner with TriNet is because you guys serve both businesses and nonprofits. And we have some of both audiences on this webinar today. Thank you all for joining. So my question, probably a big question that you get, is what does a PEO actually cost for a business, for a nonprofit? Does it matter? How does pricing work?
Yeah. So there's typically 2 models of pricing when it comes to PEOs, and I think this is a really important piece when you're evaluating. So they'll either do it as a percentage of payroll, or they'll do it as a per employee per month. And so typically a PEO is going to be billing you when you run your payroll. So let's say, for example, you're a 150 person organization. Let's say that your per employee per month is $100. And all of your employees are exempt. You have 24 checks per year. You're basically going to be billed $50 per employee per paycheck. So then it end up being that $100 per month. Now, what a PEO will do, since we're not like most softwares or services you might evaluate where there's just a certain cost and you pay it. We build out a comprehensive ROI, and most PEOs are going to do this for you, where we compare your current benefits versus what the benefits would look like with a PEO, all of the offsets on technology that you're currently using. If you're paying $3,000 to $5,000 a year on an EPLI policy, also on the 401k, since it's a multiple employer plan with most PEOs, you're typically going to see a savings on the basis points. You're going to see a savings on the admin fee that the broker is charging you for the retirement. So even if there is a higher cost on the admin side, we try to offset as much of it as we can by finding those cost offsets. So you're not double paying for things, within your business if you do decide to partner with a PEO.
That's really helpful, right? We got to make sure that it makes sense. Obviously, everyone loves the idea of freeing up time, but in the end, we need it to make financial sense as well, so we can all focus on the mission. So I love that you give the cost breakdown analysis to see if that makes sense.
And Roberta, one other thing I'd actually like to add to that, if you're a nonprofit organization, it oftentimes makes more sense to go with a PEO that has a per employee per month billing model. And a big reason for that is oftentimes the grants that are coming in, will be earmarked for direct or indirect costs. Now, if you go with a PEO that's a per employee per month as opposed to a percentage of payroll, typically when it's a percentage of payroll, they're bundling a few different things into that administrative cost. Maybe the workers' comp, SUTA rate. So these things aren't being broken out on the bill. So what that means is, our nonprofit clients are typically going to have more money for direct costs as opposed to indirect, and more of the cost of that PEO can be allocated towards the direct costs budget because all of these line items are broken out. So you're not paying more of your indirect costs towards that admin fee. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you. And from my understanding, you guys work with anywhere from teams as small as 5 employees to 150 plus, right? Organizations of all sizes. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that's the most common range. Sometimes we see organizations up to 500, but it's exceedingly rare that we see organizations larger than that come to a PEO.
That is very helpful. I know it's time for us to wrap up, but I got one more quick question that I think is a very common question as well that was asked is, what if we have an HR person? Do I need to replace them to go with this? If I partner with a PO, do I need to let them go? I like my people.
Roberta, that's a great question. I would say that, and I forgive me on this analogy here, but, if your HR person is Batman, then the PEO is probably their utility belt. So you do need someone on your team to manage that relationship with the PEO. Ultimately, we want to reduce the amount of time spent on minutia and tasks that can be automated. But we still have to get that information in the system. There still has to be a liaison or someone that speaks to us. So I think that, even if you have an HR person, a PEO can be a great option because you're enabling them. Maybe like the example I said before, about the group that had 2 separate spreadsheets managing their payroll and having to reconcile it and then send it to their accountant. That takes a lot of time. So it's really just about enabling you and making sure that these things can happen quicker.
That's really good. Again, I like that. Whether you have an HR person already and you can partner with them, or you don't and you can just offload that, but they still need somebody. Obviously, you always need somebody, managing it with your team. So we are out of time, but I just want to thank you so much, Austen and Cindy, for putting this together. This is super helpful. Thank you to everybody who joined us or is watching this recording live later. Again, if you have any questions, reach out to myself or to Austen. I'll be sending his information out. And yeah, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, Roberta, Sunny, Solace Media team, thank you so much for hosting us. And we really appreciate this opportunity.